Welcome to another episode of Can't Make This Up, a history podcast where we talk about unusual and strange history. Today we're going to talk about the history of Hollywood, specifically monster movies. The Creature from the Black Lagoon was always my favorite classic monster movie growing up. The Creature is certainly one of the most original and iconic monsters to ever grace the silver screen. But did you know that it was designed by a woman? Millicent Patrick was a makeup artist, animator, special effects designer, and an actress, but unfortunately her contributions to the horror film genre have largely been forgotten. My guest today is Mallory O'Meara, and she has written the first biography of Millicent's life and career in Hollywood, The Lady from the Black Lagoon, Hollywood Monsters and the Lost Legacy of Millicent Patrick. Mallory is an award-winning author, co-host of the literary podcast Reading Glasses, and she works in the horror movie industry as a screenwriter and producer. Today, Mallory and I discuss Millicent's unique childhood, how she entered Hollywood, and how the film industry failed to recognize her achievements. Now on to the show.
The You Can't Make This Up History Podcast, bringing you strange but true things from the past. It's not the average history that you learned in school. We're bringing you the heroes and bringing you the fools, and stories that are just too crazy to believe. The stranger than fiction and super unique.
Mallory O'Meara, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on.
If you would be so kind as to introduce yourself, you are kind of unique among the guests that I have on the show. Normally I have historians or journalists, but you are a monster movie producer, and so if you could tell us a little bit about how you got into the horror movie genre.
How I got into making them, or how I got into the genre itself?
Both.
My name is Mallory O'Meara. I do make movies, but I'm also an author and a podcaster and a historian. I got into the genre itself when I was a teenager, just sort of fell in love with it, both books and in films. And ever since, I wanted to do it for a living.
All right, and so you start off your book by talking about this personal fascination that you had with Millicent Patrick. Can you tell us how you discovered this woman and why you're so interested in her?
Well, I first found out about Millicent Patrick when I was 17 and going through all the original Universal monster movies because I didn't really have anybody around me or in my family that was a huge monster movie fan, so I had to teach myself basically all about monster films and realized that I need to start with all the classics. So I was going through all the Universal films, Frankenstein, Dracula, Bride of Frankenstein. I loved all of them. And I got to the last one, which, Creature from the Black Lagoon is the last one to be included. And I fell in love with the film. And just like anyone who is a nerd for cinema, I wanted to know everything about how the movie was made, all the behind the scenes trivia. I wanted to see photos of how things came together. So I was researching online, and up until that point, all of my cinematic heroes were men. Tom Savini, Rick Baker, Dick Smith, all these titans of the monster making world. And I had never seen a woman do those things. And because of that, I had never really considered that I had a place in that industry. And while I was looking through photos on behind the scenes on the set and in the monster shop, there was a picture of a woman working on the creature suit. And it was like being struck by lightning. It completely changed my life. And I thought, oh my God, who is this? And the caption just said Millicent Patrick, illustrator and designer. And that was it. There was no website about her, no Wikipedia article. There was very little information available about her online. But it still struck me, and it still completely opened my brain up. And I thought, oh my God, girls can do this too. And she became my hero.
Really cool. And I think it's safe to say that you've written the definitive biography about her at this point, right?
Yeah, no one had ever written about her before I wrote The Lady from the Black Lagoon.
All right, well, let's start off talking about her a little bit. Let's talk about Millicent's origins. For starters, her name isn't actually Millicent Patrick.
That's true. Yeah, she actually went under 7 different names over the course of her life.
Well, that sounds great for a researcher.
It was a nightmare.
All right, so what was her given name? What was her family like?
Well, she was born under the name Mildred Rossi, and she was born to the Rossi family. Her father was a man named Camille Rossi, and he actually was the superintendent of construction for 10 years at a place called Hearst Castle, which was the summer home of a man named William Randolph Hearst, which was really America's first media mogul. And by summer home, I mean this place was a massive, massive, huge estate where people like Charlie Chaplin and Winston Churchill would go and vacation and hang out and party there. So Millicent Patrick grew up in this really unique environment.
Yeah, what a interesting childhood to see these people kind of coming and going and being exposed to this high society as a kid has to have quite an effect on you.
Yeah, that's really where she started with her love of film and cinema and Hollywood. And after growing up in an environment like that, there was really no place for her to go but Hollywood. Nothing could compare.
Now, what about her mom, Morgan?
Julia Morgan wasn't her mother. Julia Morgan was the architect in charge.
I'm sorry.
Julia Morgan was the architect in charge of Hearst Castle, and Julia Morgan was the woman that Camille Rossi worked under. She was his boss. Millicent Patrick's mother did not work on Hearst Castle. That's okay, but Julia Morgan was a really, really incredible woman. She was a California architect. She designed nearly 800 buildings over the course of her life in California, and she had a really fantastic relationship with William Randolph Hearst, and she designed a lot for him. And her biggest and definitely most famous is Hearst Castle.
So when Millicent gets a little older and begins her career, she starts off at Disney. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was working at being an artist at Disney was Millicent's first job right out of art school, which was really cool because the school that Millicent went to was a place called the Chouinard Institute. It was run by a woman named Nelbert Chouinard, and back in the early days of Disney couldn't afford the things that nowadays when we think of Disney, we think of this massive corporation that has all the money in the world. Right. But back in the early days, they had nothing. And to make the movies that Disney really wanted to make, and when I say Disney, I mean Walt Disney, but at the time he was still working with his brother Roy. But Walt Disney knew that he needed his animators trained in a very particular way and to create art, to be trained to create art in a particular way, but he didn't have the money to send them all to class and to school. So he had been asking all around Southern California at art schools who could help him, and all of them turned him down because he couldn't pay. But Nelbert Chouinard, who ran the Chouinard Institute, said, "You know what? Bring your animators down. We'll figure something out." And it worked out really, really well in sort of a pipeline form between the Chouinard Institute and Disney Studios, where, the animators were being trained there, but then Disney was also able to kind of get his pick of the up and coming students at the Chouinard Institute, and Millicent Patrick was one of them. Millicent ended up working her way up in Disney to become one of the first female animators. She started in the ink and paint department, which a lot of people don't realize back then was entirely staffed by women. And it was exactly what you think it is. After animators drew the cells that would be the animation cells, they needed to be both inked and painted. And women did all of that work. And that's where Millicent started. She started in paint and worked and ended up getting moved over to inking because she had this incredible skill of being able to convey a lot of movement and very few lines. And that is exactly what Disney wanted. And then she ended up moving into the world of animation.
What was life like for being a woman animator at Disney? How were those female animators viewed in the company?
Well, Disney was actually a pretty decent place for a working female animator back then. Disney went out of its way to try to make sure that the women were treated as equally as they could, and were not bothered by the men working there. Whether or not those missives were successfully heard, we don't know. But as far as we historians can see, it was actually a pretty great place to work.
As a biographer, you had to kind of learn to accept the reality of who your subject was versus kind of who you wanted her to be. How did you have to struggle with that, writing this biography of Millicent?
When I started this project, also when I finished, Millicent still is a hero of mine, but that's the danger of writing about your heroes, is that you have to write all the good and all the bad. And during the process of telling the story of Millicent Patrick's life, I had to reckon with some things that decisions I didn't agree with, mistakes that she made, because I was struggling with this great sense of wanting to protect her. I was working so hard to make sure that people knew who she was, and I thought that maybe if people didn't like her and she made all these mistakes, that they wouldn't care about her. But then I realized that I was judging her just as badly as the people that I imagined out there that wouldn't like her were doing. And I realized I needed to stop, and that no matter what she did in her life, it didn't stop the fact that she's still worth writing about, and she was still one of the most important artists film has ever seen. And just because women screw up doesn't mean they're not worth writing about.
Absolutely. That's what makes her a real person.
Yes.
All right, so after Disney, she starts to work her way into Universal Studios and then eventually on her way to Creature from the Black Lagoon. But if you could talk a little bit, like this is your expertise as a screenwriter and movie producer. What is the process of creating a monster for the big screen? What's that like?
Well, normally it starts with some concept art, just talking to the director, and it sort of depends. Back then, it would be a conversation between the director, the producer, maybe the writer. The writer had, written out either a very vague description with some writers, or very, very detailed description in the script of what the monster would look like, and then the producers and the director would get together and kind of decide how they wanted it to look. Then they would pull in the makeup department, and they would find an artist to start creating what's called concept art, and just basically ideas of what it could look like. And that's what Millicent Patrick did. She wasn't the one sculpting the monster. She was the one designing it. So she had come up with, and she had done it with a few films. Creature from the Black Lagoon was not her first. Just come up with ideas and sketches of what the monster would look like, and then the sculptors would take that sketch and then sculpt a 3D version of it, and then somebody would mold it into a life-sized creature, or if it wasn't being played by a human inside of it, a monster-sized creature, and then it would get, the mold would be done, it would be painted and ready to go.
Is that still the process today with CGI and everything being so digital?
Well, if it's a digital monster, obviously it's a very, very different process, but there's still a lot of special effects artists working today. There still are monsters being made that are real. Guillermo del Toro's 2017 film, Shape of Water, that is not a digital monster. That's a real suit that was designed by a man named Mike Hill. And same thing, except that Mike did all the things. He designed it, and then he sculpted it and molded it, painted it, and the incredible Doug Jones got inside that suit and played it.
When this film came out, obviously today it's pretty iconic and it's revered as a great horror film, but it was pretty controversial at the time. Why was that?
Creature from the Black Lagoon?
Yes.
It was controversial behind the scenes before it came out. It was not publicly controversial, just because there were a lot of concerns about the creature. If you've ever even seen, you don't have to have seen the film to know this, but if you just look at posters, there's a lot of imagery of the monster carrying the Julie Adams, the female lead, away. And with the censorship boards, there were a lot of people who were concerned about, sexual scenes between the creature and Kay, who is a character that Julie Adams plays. But they were able to assure the boards and the people in charge of censorship that the film was going to be fine.
And it became very popular with the public.
It wasn't a smash hit, but it definitely did well, and it did well for Universal and became a monster classic for sure.
Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying learning about the creature from the Black Lagoon and Millicent Patrick. I wanted to take a little break from our conversation to ask you a fundamental question to this episode. Have you ever seen the creature from the Black Lagoon? I watched it a lot growing up. We had it on VHS. I know some of you might be of an age demographic you don't know what VHS is, but we had it at home and I got to watch it, and I have fond memories of watching this film. But if you've never seen it before, you don't need to go get a VCR to watch it. The Creature from the Black Lagoon is easily available to stream right into your own home. It's available on Amazon Prime Video, and I've included a link to that in the description of this episode in your podcast app. If you've never seen it before, it is a great film. It was released in 1954, and while it might not be scary to us today by our standards, it has an excellent story that holds up well, which is why the film is still considered a classic to this day. So if you would like a 2-night rental or to buy the film, it's available on Amazon Prime. Link is down in the description. And I wanted to share with you another excellent podcast from the Straight Up Strange podcast family, Monsters and Friends. Each episode covers a new type of monsters. Some of them are aquatic, like the creature we're talking about today. Season 2 was great. Each episode was monsters from a different state, so you can find your state and see what supposed creepy creatures lurk there. So listen to this promo for Monsters and Friends, and then we'll get back to my discussion with Mallory O'Meara.
Hello friends, my name is Michael Patrick and I'm the host of the Monsters and Friends podcast. Each week, my Bigfoot friend Barry and I fire up our trusty Winnebago and we travel the United States in search of cryptids, legends, and lore. However, we're not looking for any old cryptid, legend, and lore. We want to introduce you to some of the monsters of the world that don't get the same spotlight as Barry's cousin Bigfoot. Did you know that in Ireland, there's an 8-foot murderous otter? Or in the Mongolian desert, there's a worm that can kill you instantly. Come with Barry and I each and every week as we travel the United States in search of interesting monsters and stories. Once we find them, we usually find a good spot to camp, sit around the campfire, sip on warm cider, and chat about life, or sometimes butterflies. We'd love for you to join us each and every week and learn about the amazing things and stories that we discover. You can find the Monsters and Friends podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll chat again real soon.
Like a monster classic, for sure.
Now, without giving away too much of what becomes of Millicent, but can you at least hint on, what's the reason that the fact that she designed the creature and largely came up with the concept, why is it that we've never heard of this?
Well, the problem with what happened with Millicent Patrick all originated with a man named Bud Westmore, who was the head of the Universal Monster Shop at the time. And he was so jealous of Millicent Patrick getting acclaim for her work that even though she lied and told people that it was his design, he fired her and essentially blacklisted her, and she never worked behind the scenes on a film ever again.
So what I really like about your book is it's part the narrative of Millicent, but it's also your own personal narrative in researching this. Can you tell us a little bit about how you dug into your hero?
Yeah, well, the book sort of ended up being like Julie and Julia, but for monsters. And the reason for that is when I started writing it, it originated as just a straightforward biography, but I realized that I was telling a story about somebody that no one had ever heard of. This wasn't like, Winston Churchill or Margaret Thatcher or, big people that everyone had knew about and would see their name on a shelf and go, oh, I'm interested in reading about that. I was telling a story of an unknown person, and I needed to give people a reason to care about her. And the easiest way I knew how to do that was to show the readers why I care about her. And so I started writing about why she matters to me, and that sort of evolved into taking the reader on this journey through the book in all of my research, and show why she is still relevant today. Because what happened to Millicent Patrick with Bud Westmore still happens to women right now, and I know because it's happened to me. So I tell those stories as well, and it ended up into being what it is now, which is, again, like kind of more of a Julie and Julia book than a straightforward biography.
And at one point, you mentioned that you had to agree to marry a Mormon dead guy in order to research your book?
Not quite. One of the research huddles I had to get in with myself and make decisions about was one of the greatest archives of genealogical information in the United States is the Mormon Church and the Mormon archives. Mm-hmm. And they have this belief that and not all Mormons, but some Mormons have this belief that if a Mormon man dies unmarried, you can posthumously marry him to someone who died while they were single. So they're always looking for people's personal information, people's genealogical information, so they could find sort of, if I die unmarried, they could be like, oh, Matt, well, here's a potential bride for this person. And so to get into these archives, you give them your information and they'll grant you access. So I decided to do it.
That is dedication.
For sure.
You describe, and you said in the book, quote, an infuriating misogynistic bullshit that Millicent had to face. And we'd like to tell ourselves that, well, that was back in the 1950s. That was the Mad Men era. Has Hollywood changed as much as we would like to think?
Well, how many women got nominated for Best Director this Oscar season? The answer is 0. There is now a lot, thanks to the incredible women of the Me Too movement, there is a lot of conversation and there is change, which is fantastic, but it's not as fast as people would like to believe it is. It's big ships turn slowly. Films take a long time to make. There's still a lot of misogyny in the film world. It's still difficult, and it's great to have these conversations, but what people need to do is actually hire women, and not just for directors, but above and below the line in every single type of job on a film set. And again, there is some change, but it is very slow. Luckily, it's a little bit different than when Millicent was working in the 1950s. But we still haven't had a monster movie that was released by a major studio feature a monster that was designed by a woman since Millicent.
And that was, almost 70 years ago?
Yep.
That's crazy.
It's bonkers.
But you include a lot of good, statistics on, how underrepresented, women and particularly minority women are in the film industry.
Yeah. I mean, again, luckily we're turning very, very slowly. We're looking forward to this year, the release of the remake of Candyman with a new, with a Black female director, Nia DaCosta. She's she wrote and directed it, which is going to be really exciting. But that's one movie out of how many movies monster movies that are going to be released this year. So change is there, but it's very, very slow.
So after getting the opportunity to research and write a full book about one of your heroes, what was the most rewarding part of this for you?
Definitely the most rewarding part has been whenever I do events, just the women who, people in general, but a lot of the women who come up to me and tell me, they feel really seen by this book and this book made them feel less alone, and that now they have a hero to look at, and that's Millicent, and that is worth everything. It's worth all the years of working and writing and all the money I spent and all of the frustration I felt, and that makes every moment worth it.
Awesome. Well, this was a fantastic subject. I really enjoyed learning about Millicent Patrick through your book. If someone wanted to learn more about her life by picking up a copy of her book, your book, where can they go?
Everywhere. The book is available on all places that you buy books. Finding it at your local bookstore is the preferred way, especially right now with everything that's going on in North America and all over the world. And I believe that Amazon, some of the bigger corporate book retailers are going to be slowing down their book sales. So now is more important than ever to support your local indies. If you're interested in listening to the audiobook, I narrated it, and it's available on Libro FM, on Audible, on all places that you get audiobooks.
Yep, and I'll say you did a wonderful job narrating it. That's how I read your book.
Oh, thank you so much.
And if someone wanted to learn more about you, do you have a website they can go to?
I do, MalloryO'Meara.com. I'm on Twitter at Mallory O'Meara and Instagram, but my website is where there's all information about my events, which unfortunately are completely cleared at the moment.
Right.
But all my social media is on there. My information about the book I'm working on now is there. My podcast, everything I do is at MalloryO'Meara.com.
All right. Well, Mallory, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope you feel like you've learned something new. If you are interested in learning more about the woman who designed the creature from the Black Lagoon, Millicent Patrick, look down in the description of this episode in your podcast app. I have provided an IndieBound link for Lady from the Black Lagoon that will connect you to where you can find this book in your local bookseller. If you like the Can't Make This Up History podcast, consider subscribing so you never miss an episode, and consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever you happen to be listening to this. Those reviews are super helpful. If you've been listening for a little bit and you like what we cover here on the Can't Make This Up History podcast, tell a friend. Let them know what you've been listening to. Let them know your favorite episodes. That way they can learn about some of the strange, unusual history we cover on the show. If you're on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, connect with the show. You can find the show at CMTU History, as in Can't Make This Up History. I would love to connect with you on social and just hear what you think about the show. All right, that's it for today's episode. Check back next time. We are going to be talking about the history of the SETI space program and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. There's a really interesting 50-year history there that I can't wait to share with you. See you then.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.